Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I returned home from work with an unpleasant feeling in my stomach. I didn't know why, but I felt like I would find out soon. It was only 5 o'clock on Friday evening. This is unusual for me, as I work for myself and like to spend time alone in the office on a Friday night to make sure everything is in order and ready for the important day on Saturday. My name is Mark Ashworth, and my business is Ashworth Autos. I started my working life at the age of 16 as an auto mechanic. At 20, he opened his own car repair shop, specializing in expensive European cars. There are a lot of them in our district, but the only mechanic is 150 miles away. Yes, it's expensive, but I have a friendly bank manager who understood my business plan, and I am a very talented mechanic. Besides, I had a deposit left to me by my grandfather. All European cars are driven exclusively by wealthy people. They come to me because I have a good reputation. Soon they started asking me to pick up cars, usually used ones, for their sons and daughters when they started driving. I quickly added a used car sales business to my car repair shop, and then a body repair shop. Now I am 38 years old. I have 4 locations in the district, and I own a business, according to the most conservative estimates, worth $8 million. I was coming home early because my wife, Hannah, said I had to be home early today. She has an important offer and she wants to talk to me about it. Hannah is 35 years old and we've been married for 14 years. We met because her father, John, asked me to find her a car for her 20th birthday. A spark immediately passed between us. The day she picked up the car, she asked me out on a date. A year later, we got married and now we have 2 boys, James, 12, and Martin, 10. Hannah's father, John, is an accountant, but a very nice man. He is a partner in an accounting office and helps me a lot in business, giving me a lot of time. Hannah's mom, Stephanie, calls me a fat monkey and makes it clear that, in her opinion, her daughter could claim more than me. Hannah has an older brother, Alexander, everyone calls him Alex, and a younger sister, Susan. Alex never got married, and it's clear that he's not going to do it. Susan is married to a lawyer named Barkley. He imagines himself to be a kind of shark, but actually earns his living as a trial lawyer. Hannah's mother considers him the best son-in-law in the world. Something happened to Susan in her early teens. I never found out what exactly, but she had to have surgery, as a result of which she was unable to have children. As a result, our 2 boys turned out to be the only grandchildren. Stephanie seems annoyed by this, but Susan has become depressed because her mother only talks about children. Hannah is worried about her sister. At one of the family meetings, I suggested that they adopt a child, but Stephanie exploded, saying that she wanted the grandchildren to be biologically hers. John's next offer was surrogacy. Susan asked how this could be done, and I explained about IVF as best I could. Stephanie wrinkled her nose again, saying it was too complicated, and asked who would be the egg donor. Later that evening, Hannah and I discussed Susan's problem. I suggested that she donate her eggs for IVF. Hannah asked how this would happen, and I replied that I would study the issue. It turned out that it was not so difficult to take eggs, and I brought this information home. This way, Stephanie will be able to get her biological children, and everything in the world will be fine. This conversation took place about 3 months ago, and since then this topic has come up as if by accident, about every 2 to 3 weeks. The reason I had an unpleasant feeling in my stomach is that for the last week or 10 days, Hannah has been a little out of her mind. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but she was texting someone. She is usually completely open with her phone, but in this case she was secretive. Our house stands on a plot of slightly more than 1.5 hectares. I got the land from my grandfather when I was 11 years old. I built a house on it shortly after we got married. My plot is part of a 6-hectare property that my grandfather maintained in the form of a horticultural business. He left the house and almost half a hectare to my older brother. The remaining 4 hectares were sold for housing construction, and the proceeds were transferred to a trust fund for the benefit of the whole family, including for the education of our children. The house is not visible from the road, so when I turned into it, I saw only a few parked cars, and realized that my bad premonitions were justified when I saw John and Stephanie's car, Susan and Barkley's car, and several other people whom I knew as more distant relatives. I felt like a whole bunch of shit was coming at me, and they were going to pretend it was caviar. I parked in front of the house and went inside, preparing for the coming storm. I deliberately entered through the garage door, knowing that I would not be heard. I stood in the back room and listened, but I could only hear muffled voices. I always carry a dictaphone in my pocket. John taught me this when I went to a meeting to take my notes at the end of it. Out of habit, I turned on the recorder and put it back in my pocket, being sure that it would capture most of the conversation that I understood was going to take place. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and entered the kitchen. There were 8 people sitting in the corner next to the kitchen. Hannah, John, and Stephanie are sitting on a 3-seater sofa. Susan and Barclay are on a double. Alex is on a single, and Joan and Karen, 2 aunts, are on chairs brought from the dining room. Only the chair that had been moved from my home office remained empty. It was placed so that Alex and 2 aunts surrounded it, and it was directly opposite Hannah, John, and Stephanie. Clearly a prepared ambush. When I closed the door behind me, Hannah said, "Come in, Mark, and sit down. We're just discussing a couple of things and would like to hear your opinion." I thought, we would like to hear your opinion, so now I will be offered something, but I am expected to have no choice. I went to the corner, but turned around one of the stools from the bar and sat down on it. I wanted the atmosphere in the room to change, and sitting on a high stool, I not only separate myself from everyone else, but also become taller. That is, they will have to look up at me. I didn't say anything, but I looked Hannah straight in the eye, and there was a lot of irritation on my face. She blushed when she realized what I was doing, but she couldn't hold my gaze. I slowly looked around the room. John and Alex weren't looking at me. Stephanie had an expression of triumph on her face, as if she was about to achieve her cherished goal. Barclay was looking into my eyes and grinning as if he was going to get the better of me, and Susan had a smile on her face that hadn't been there for a long time. Hannah sat in silence waiting for me to speak, but I didn't do it. Looking around the room, I continued to look at her, and she tried her best to avoid my gaze. I thought, I can wait as long as you can, and was silent. It was turning into a battle, and she was getting mad at me. In the end, Stephanie broke the silence by saying, "We discussed Susan's problem, and it seems that we have found a solution." I didn't say anything to Stephanie and continued to look at Hannah, who was now fidgeting under my gaze. Eventually, Hannah looked up at me. "Mark, as you know, Susan cannot have children, and you have studied the possibility of surrogacy, and we think that this is a good option. Mom wants the eggs to biologically belong to the family, so over the past few weeks we have been discussing the option of me being the surrogate mother." I raised my hand to stop her. "Have you discussed this over the past few weeks? And why did they consider it necessary to exclude me from these discussions? Obviously, this decision will have a serious impact on me and the boys, and I think we should have been aware of all this." Stephanie cut in. "What do you mean? It has nothing to do with you. Just hold her hand and smile." I took a deep breath and turned to Stephanie without taking my eyes off Hannah. "Naturally, it will affect me and the boys. Their mother will be in an IVF clinic, then she will carry the baby, which means that she will not be able to do some things for them, for example, carry them to the crib. Both previous pregnancies were difficult for her, and both times she was hospitalized for a month with high blood pressure. She will have to undergo an examination and spend time in the hospital during childbirth, which will erase her from their lives. She will also need time to recover. You have to have a certain degree of selfishness not to understand how destructive this will be for my family." I was most worried when, at my words, "IVF clinic," Hannah's gaze slid around the room. A grin appeared on Barclay's face and Susan shuddered. What am I missing? Stephanie obviously enjoyed bringing me up to speed. There will be no IVF clinic. My grandson will be conceived in love and passion, not in a test tube. A light bulb flashed. This is an ambush, and the others are here to keep me under control. I felt anger flare up on my face and screamed, "Hannah, explain everything now." She darted a glance at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. The conversation hadn't gone the way she'd planned, and now the truth had come out, and she'd lost control of the conversation. She said, "IVF is not the best option. I stopped taking pills 2 months ago. My period came 3 weeks ago and will come in another week. The doctors say that in about 2 to 3 weeks I will become fertile. During my fertility, Barclay will move in with me for a week, and at the end of the week I should already be pregnant. And after that, Susan and Barclay will be able to adopt a child who will be biologically native to both of them." By this time, I was standing right in front of Hannah and felt Alex's hand on my shoulder. I tried to pull away, but he held my shoulder very tightly. I heard his words, "Hold on, Mark. Please don't do anything stupid." I stood up straight and without addressing anyone said, "Don't do anything stupid. Nothing will be stupid after this shit." Now I turned to everyone and said, "Get out of my house." Stephanie tried to get her way. "No, we have to come to an agreement and decide if you will stay in the house when this happens." John had already got up and was trying to lift his wife from her seat when I said, "John, I've never hit a woman before, but if that dumb fool doesn't get out of this house in 10 seconds, God knows I'm going to hit her." At that moment, Stephanie looked into my eyes and realized for the first time the truth of my words. She jumped up and asked, "Hannah, don't you need Alex to stay for protection?" I laughed. "If you think I'm going to physically harm my wife, you don't know me. If you think that this nonsense will end well for our marriage, then you really don't know me at all." Hannah gasped and then said, "Mom, please go away. Everyone else leave. Mark and I have a lot to discuss." When everyone left the house, I went to my office, locking the door. First of all, I downloaded the conversation that had just taken place. Then I rebooted the recorder. As he was doing this, Hannah screamed, "Mark, I've never seen you act so rude to anyone. You have to come out here and discuss everything like an adult." Good God, she's spouting all this nonsense at me and she's mad at me for being mad, I thought to myself. I laughed but didn't say anything. At work, I have a system for recording all phone calls, SMS, and WhatsApp messages. They are fixed as part of our CRM, Customer Relationship Management System, and have saved us more than once when we billed for additional work. Hannah's phone was an office phone, so all her messages were recorded, although they were saved in the trash folder. I quickly accessed her recordings and downloaded all the voice calls and messages between her mom, Susan, and Barclay. In fact, everything turned out to be simple. They created a WhatsApp group called Baby. It included Hannah, Susan, Barclay, and Stephanie. Taking my time, I looked through the messages in the group. The discussion began 3 months ago, right after the day when surrogacy was mentioned. It all started with the fact that Hannah offered to donate eggs for a surrogate mother, and then it turned into the fact that she herself would become a surrogate mother. Stephanie played a key role in how conception would take place, and Barclay readily made suggestions. Stephanie only talked about the fact that the child should be conceived in passion. She had some kind of irrational opinion that a child conceived in a test tube would not have sufficient emotional maturity. It took me about an hour to collect my thoughts, and I also took this opportunity to contact my lawyer and ask him for a referral to a divorce lawyer. When I left the office, I found Hannah sitting in a corner and drinking a glass of wine. The first flash of anger had passed, but there was still fury written on her face. I looked at her. "Did you really think that I would swallow this sudden nonsense?" Her anger flared up again when she replied, "What do you mean, nonsense? We agreed on how to help my sister get out of depression, and you're acting like a spoiled brat, literally kicking my family out of my house." I just laughed. "You want to commit adultery under the guise of allegedly providing a child for your sister, and you are angry at me for refusing you. Hannah, go and think about what you're offering, and remember that this is also my house, and anyone who disrespects me in it will feel all my anger. I want you to understand clearly that this is not going to happen. If you keep doing this, it will lead to our divorce. Do you need me to draw a detailed picture so that you understand? So where are the kids? I hope you at least showed common sense and didn't involve them in this mess." The word divorce knocked the wind out of her sails, but she recovered and said, "If you divorce me, I will leave you without pants, paying child support and spouse. And I'll also get half of the business, which I'll sell to anyone who buys it." I started laughing again. She really is noticeably dumb, and answered, "I hope you haven't been listening to Barclay's advice. Not only are these tips bad, but his advice will lead to the fact that I will take away his license as the beneficiary of your actions. But let me explain that not only this house, but also the land on which it stands, came to me before we got married. This is not marital property. We both signed a marital contract. You have no claims to my business, and I have no claims to the business that you and your father jointly run. If you plan to get pregnant, especially from a man other than your husband, your medical history will show that you will not be able to take care of the children. Don't forget that during both pregnancies, you were hospitalized with blood pressure problems. So I agree to the guardianship. Hannah, if you want a dirty fight, I'll give it to you. You won't get pregnant by Barclay if you plan to stay married to me. And I won't agree to IVF because I don't trust you anymore. You've made it so that you either win or lose, and the payoff is our marriage. And now where are the children? I want to see them." She realized that I had stopped the discussion and she would have to step back. She said, "They're at the Pattersons at number 30, and I'm going to get them now. Please cook dinner." I left a couple of pizzas in the fridge. I warmed up the pizza, then played with the boys in the garden until it was time to go to bed. I knew I needed to talk to Hannah, but I just couldn't stand this conversation. Both boys went to bed at 9:30 in the evening, as I had exhausted both them and myself playing football in the garden. Finally, I got to the point where I couldn't hold back any longer, went to the fridge for a beer and went to the corner where Hannah was sitting on the only chair. He sat down in front of her on the 3-seater sofa, took a long sip of beer and said, "Did you really believe that I would agree to you cheating on me and having a baby for Susan? Not only that, you expected me to clear my own bed. I don't think you understand the disrespect and humiliation you were going to bring down on me." I noticed Hannah's sad expression when she said, "I have to do something for Susan. My sister is completely depressed. My mother hates IVF, and Barkley says they can't afford it anyway. If you don't let me, I'm afraid Susan will hurt herself, and I'll never forgive myself if she does." That's right, this is a big performance, in fact, blackmail. I poured myself another drink and replied, "By cuckolding me, you're making a puppet out of me. If they can't afford IVF, we'll give them money, or we can go 50-50 with your parents. If your mom doesn't like it, then that's her problem. To be completely clear, I have already asked the company's lawyer for a referral to a divorce lawyer. I'm serious. You do this and we'll break up. And don't blame the expenses on me. I won't stay married to a cheater, and if you do, you will become one." She ran out of the room crying, and I heard the bedroom door slam shut. I don't know if she locked it, but I decided that I wouldn't sleep next to her that night. The idea that she might try to convince me with the help of a bed was disgusting, and I wanted her to know how she would feel without me. I went into the office, locked the door again, and looked through her message log again. It turned out that they were exchanging text messages in a group. Susan is clearly upset, says that this is her only hope, and she does not know what she will do if she does not have a child in her arms. Hannah started by saying that she would work on me, and her mom just said, "Do it and ask for forgiveness. He knows that you are much taller than him." Barkley replied, "He can't afford a divorce, but Hannah said that we have a prenuptial agreement and that the business is not part of the couple's estate." Barkley's only response was, "Oh." There was silence in the group for a while, but then Hannah popped up with a message. "He's looking for a divorce lawyer." I checked my email, and my email was answered by Tony, the company's lawyer. "Oh my God, I thought you two were destined to live together. I would recommend Liam Strong. He will email you a list of his requirements." Of course, there was also a letter from Liam Strong. I opened it and read it. The main part of it contained a brief introduction about him and his practice, followed by a request for information. Deciding that now was the right time, I opened a new document in Word and outlined in it everything I had learned over the past 3 months. I also copied messages from the WhatsApp group and sent him a copy of the document that Hannah signed many years ago, giving the company permission to collect, store, and use her messages. Then he closed the computer, pulled out the sofa bed, and went to sleep. I woke up to the fact that someone was trying to open the door to the office. Then I heard a knock and a half scream from Hannah. "Mark, what are you doing? Why didn't you come to bed?" I got up and looked at my watch. It was 3:30 in the morning. Unlocking and opening the door, I found Hannah standing in the hallway in her bathrobe. It was half open, and it was clear that there was nothing under it. I looked at her in silence. "What's the problem?" She replied, "I was waiting for you in bed. I thought we could at least hug and use the opportunity to talk calmly and figure out how I can assure you that your jealousy is groundless. Obviously, there were other messages in the group. I didn't want to reveal that I had access, so I left it as it is. Instead, I replied, Hannah, over the years of our marriage, you've used lovemaking to get your way on such minor issues as the color of a new car, or whether we should get a dog. This is not a small, unimportant issue. You're planning an affair, and pseudoscientific arguments about my male ego and jealousy won't help you figure it out. I have no desire to sleep in bed with someone who is thinking about how to cheat on me, and I hope this gives you an idea of what our life will be like if you go for it. Good night, Hannah. Go to bed and take this opportunity to think about the damage you're doing to our marriage, how you're neglecting my feelings and self-respect. Jealousy is not a problem. The problem is my ability to look at myself in the mirror. I closed and locked the door. He turned off the light but remained standing to the side of the door, listening. There was light coming from under the door, and I knew Hannah was still there. I thought I heard a sigh, and then the light went out. The next day was Saturday. I usually left later on Saturday, but I left early today. I stopped at the cart to buy a bagel for breakfast, then went to the office, put on coffee, and sat down at the table to develop an action plan. I assumed Hannah would change course. She could have gone one of two ways. Or she became very nice, showing me how good a wife and mother she was and remains, hoping that I would not notice her infidelity. Or she became hellish, trying to show that if I didn't give in to her, she would turn my life into a continuous misery. I assumed that today would be the first, and after that I would take the opposite approach. I stayed in the office until 4:30 after everyone had left. I just couldn't bring myself to go home. I realized that our marriage is like a mirror, and Hannah threw a very large brick at it. The mirror is cracked, and now it will always be cracked. I began to think that our marriage was doomed, no matter what Hannah did next. I dragged myself home by 5 o'clock. Of course, Hannah was in the kitchen, a sundress clinging to her figure. Her makeup was flawless, and her smile was like Helen of Troy, so you could send 1,000 ships for her. Normally, I would have practically attacked her in the kitchen, but this time I didn't even pay attention. I went into the spare room to change my clothes. After about 20 minutes, she called up the stairs. "Mark, dinner is ready." I had to give the boys a good show, but I wanted to make sure that Hannah understood that this image of her as a loving wife would not change my decision. When I went to sit down, a glass of red wine was set for Hannah and me. Then she came over to the table carrying a plate of T-bone steak, a large portion of English fries and mushrooms. My favorite Saturday dinner. It's not surprising. I hardly paid any attention to Hannah talking to the boys about everything she couldn't talk about. She tried to change the subject, but I wouldn't let her. The boys didn't notice it, but she did. After eating, she said, "Mark, help me wash the dishes, and the boys will go play a little." I got up and started clearing the table, but Hannah stayed seated. When she heard that the boys were playing video games, she said, "Mark, sit down and talk to me. What's the matter?" I went back to the table and sat down. Then he said, "Can you really ask that with a straight face? If you don't know what's going on, then this marriage is in even bigger trouble than I thought. Let me explain it to you. You're planning to cheat on me with the explicit intention of getting pregnant by someone else. You also realize that I'm not buying it, and that's why you're putting on a show of loving wife for me, trying to pretend that if I let you do this, then you'll be the best wife and mother a man can dream of. But it won't help, Hannah. If you do this, you will never be a good wife again. You will only be a fool who cheats on me. To be clear, I've already contacted a divorce lawyer and will end our marriage if you do." Her expression changed from a smiling, loving wife to a bitch. Her voice was half a whisper, but there was anger in it. She hissed, "Let me get this straight. I decided to do this for my sister. If you can't accept it, then divorce me." It sounded like a threat. I think she thought I was bluffing. I took a deep breath and said, "Today I was sitting in the office and thinking about what a good marriage is. Marriage is like a mirror, and now you're throwing stones at our mirror. The problem is that our mirror is broken, and no matter how hard we try to put it back together, it will always be in cracks. I have a terrible feeling that our marriage is now fractured and, in the end, like a broken mirror, it will collapse." I'm not kidding. It's not something I can put up with. You choose them, not me and the boys. You have a very short time to show that the most important thing in your life is us. If you don't do it, then, well, there's nothing left for you and me. I got up from the table and went to the boys' room. We played Call of Duty all night. I had a clear feeling that our family was breaking up, and I was very sad. The next few weeks passed in the same way. Hannah tried her best to be the perfect wife. Every time she tried to talk about the baby, I told her the same thing, that this was an excuse to break up a relationship. She stopped being so venomous, but switched to "Trust me, Mark." One evening, Susan came to have dinner with us. After we finished, Hannah invited me to join them in a corner. Susan started the conversation. "Mark, my life won't be complete without a child. I really need him, and what Hannah is ready to do is the biggest gift that can be given to me. Can't you open your heart to me?" I looked at Hannah to make sure she understood that I could see this ambush from a mile away, and then I said, "Susan, there are several ways to achieve this." I was looking directly at Susan now, but I heard Hannah's sharp sigh and continued. "Life may have treated you unfairly, but I am absolutely serious. If you continue down this path, Hannah and I will end our marriage. Are you willing to sacrifice this for your own personal reason? There are other issues that no one has even mentioned. What happens if Barkley can't finish the job the first time? Will it become monthly until she gets pregnant? It took us 9 months trying to get pregnant with James and 5 months with Martin." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that Hannah was looking away. Obviously, she hoped I hadn't thought of that. Then I asked, And will one child be enough? Or you decide that an only child is a single child and declare that you need another one to complement your ideal family. Susan's face turned red, and Hannah started picking at her nails. I looked around and said to Hannah, "So you've been thinking about this, and you're not going to make it a one-time event. God, you are so devious. I have no doubt that you are imitating your mother." I stood up, and Susan and Hannah stood up with me. Susan was crying, but Hannah's mask fell off again, and she was angry, saying, "Mark, I never thought you'd turn out to be such an uncooperative bastard. We have given you every opportunity to resolve this issue intelligently, but you refuse. I'm going to Susan and Barclay's on Friday night, and I'll be there for a week. Figure it out." I just said, "Well, don't bother coming back here. On Friday, you will be served at their house, and your things will be in the garage. I've met Liam Strong 6 times in the last 3 weeks. The business and the trust fund are securely protected by a prenuptial agreement. The land and the house belonged to me before marriage, so all I had to do was share our investments and savings with Hannah. This means that I will give her about $1.5 million, and I have already divided the investment account into 2 parts. Our state is a no-fault state, but it has laws on unreasonable behavior. There were enough WhatsApp messages and recordings of the meeting to say that Hannah made unreasonable demands. In addition, the fact that she was hospitalized during pregnancy meant that I would most likely get custody of the boys. After leaving the kitchen to go to my room, I sent Liam a text message. She goes ahead. They start this Friday. Liam called me and after a quick hello asked, "Do you know what their plan is?" Judging by what I was just told, she will go to their house on Friday after work and plans to stay there for the weekend and the whole next week. "All right," he replied. "We have to serve her on Friday when she leaves work. This will give her time to change her mind, and it will look good for the judge. They'll want to make sure that she knows your opinion of what she's doing well, and that she's had enough opportunities to back off. Nothing will tell her about your opinion better than a divorce petition." Until Thursday evening, the house looked like an icebox. When the boys went to bed, she tried to snuggle up to me, but I didn't hug her, even when she tried to lift my hand and put it on herself. In the end, she said, "Mark, this is just 1 week of our lives. How can it change anything?" I pulled away from her and stood up. Then he said, "Hannah, this is going to change everything. You're leaving me for another man. I'll never be able to touch you without thinking about it. If you really think this is just a week out of our lives, then you really ignored me at every stage of the planning. If you go to their house tomorrow, we're finished." Hannah looked sad, but she did her best to keep eye contact with me. And I tried to keep eye contact with her. She said, "Mark, I'm not leaving you for anyone. All I'm going to do is carry a baby for my sister." I took a deep breath. "You really don't understand, do you? You're leaving me. You put their desires and interests ahead of mine and the boys. You leave us for a week, and you don't care what we do, what I tell the boys, or worse, what happens when their friends find out what you've done. And if you don't get pregnant this month, you'll do it every month until you get pregnant. Don't shake your head, people will find out, because people always find out. This is your last chance to avoid an impending car accident. But I'm afraid you turned a blind eye to the needs of this family in order to put your sister's needs and your mother's wishes first. I hope you understand what I'm talking about, and if you decide to continue, then at least you realize that what happens next inevitably depends on your actions." Hannah was sitting with her mouth open when I left the room. As I was going up the stairs, I heard her running after me. I went into my room and locked the door. A few seconds after I locked the door, I heard her knock and say, "What do you mean what happens next is inevitable? What are you planning?" I opened the door. "I've already told you that. You need to think carefully and determine your priorities." Then I closed the door again. At 10 o'clock in the evening, I was already in bed and sleeping more soundly than I had ever slept since all this mess began. I've done everything I can. The next steps depend on her. The next morning, I decided not to leave for work early. When I was preparing breakfast for the boys, Hannah came into the kitchen with a travel bag. She looked at me with some concern on her face, then turned around and put the bag in the laundry room where I couldn't see her. I went back to making breakfast for the boys and said, "I see that you have made your choice." I heard her go to the closet to get something for herself. "I thought you'd be gone." I had my back to her. I thought that we should have one last meal together even so. She stopped moving, but I knew she caught my thought when she said, "What do you mean, eat one last time?" These are a couple of mysterious words that you said to me recently. There's nothing mysterious about them, Hannah, I said. I made it clear what would happen if you continued down this path. You just decided to ignore my exceptionally clear warnings, so please stop trying to insult my intelligence. She turned to me, and I turned to her. For the first time since this mess started, she realized that I was serious. There was concern on her face as she said, "Now I can't refuse. I'm afraid for Susan's mental health if I do this." I shrugged my shoulders. "Our family has been the second most important for a long time." He then shouted, "Boys, breakfast is ready." I took the keys and said, "See you later," and walked past her to the door. She grabbed my arm. "Didn't even kiss you goodbye?" To which I replied, "No thanks, I don't want to take anything away from Barkley." I pulled my hand out of hers before she could move and went to the door. When the door closed, I heard her crying, "Mark, please, I need you to be by my side when I do this." Hannah and Susan called me repeatedly throughout the day. Even Stephanie called, but I didn't answer any of those calls. At 4 o'clock, my secretary called me and said that John was on the line. I said, "Connect me," and waited. "Hello, Mark. I know it's a shitty show, but it's turned into a battle of wills. Hannah thought you'd agree, but you fought it every step of the way. Now she thinks that if she backs down, she will feel like a loser. What can be done to fix this?" I took a very deep breath. "I'm sorry, John, but there's nothing we can do to fix this. If I let this happen, I'll lose my self-respect. I'll never be able to look at myself in the mirror, and I'll never be able to touch Hannah again. Hannah created this situation herself. If she had thought about it a little bit, she would have realized that I would never allow this to happen in my life. To be honest, I think our marriage is irretrievably ruined, and your assessment of her unwillingness to back down only confirms this. I'm sorry, John, but either she's coming home tonight or it's over between us." After which he said, "Hannah says you said you'd divorce her, is that right?" "Yes, John," I said. "If she keeps this up, I'll divorce her. The documents have already been prepared, and if she goes for it, she will be served. This is a state without fault, so if I file the paperwork, I won't back down and she won't be able to stop it." John took a deep breath and asked, "Will you fulfill the prenuptial agreement?" "I'm glad you remembered that because Hannah forgot. Yes, I will, because I want to protect my business, and the house was mine before marriage. I'll be fair to her, but not overly generous," I said. There was silence for a few seconds until John said, "I'd probably do the same if I were you. I warned Stephanie not to go down this path, but she said that in your relationship with Hannah, you jumped over your head, and you will let her do it, just not to lose your social status. I know you much better, and I should have insisted." We ended the conversation by thanking each other. I suspect that the next conversation with John or the rest of the family will not be so friendly. I decided to come home early. The boys are staying with Mrs. Neal, our neighbor, and I need to get into a new rhythm of life, because their lives should be turned upside down when the phone rang. It was John again. He just said, "Damn it, Mark, she got a divorce today." "Yes, John. I told you what I was going to do. Now she knows how serious I am. Now it's time for her to make a decision. Me and the boys, or Susan and Barkley." There was silence for a few seconds, then John said, "She's in shock. Stephanie is ready to tear you to pieces, and Susan has fallen into such a deep depression that we can't even get through to her. You really turned this family inside out." I replied, "I'm sorry, John, but now you know how I've been feeling for the last 3 weeks. It's not my fault, but I have no choice. Tell Hannah that her actions will give me the answer. If he comes home, we can talk, and if he doesn't, then I'll realize that I'm only in second place." With that, I hung up the phone. I didn't need John's answer. I went home, picked up the boys, and ordered pizza for dinner. If Hannah returns home, it will be a war zone. We had already eaten, and I turned on the dishwasher when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out and saw John, Stephanie, and Hannah getting out of the car. I told the boys to go to their rooms and play on their computers, and I went into the room. Now I hated this room because so many bad things had happened in it lately. Stephanie burst through the door first, followed closely by John. Fury was visible on her face, but John grabbed her. "Stephanie, we're here to help, not make things worse. You have to let Mark and Hannah talk." Stephanie spun on her heel. "How could it be worse? This simple man prevents our daughter from giving us grandchildren. I won't put up with it." I saw the look on John's face and suspected that Stephanie, even in full anger, had caught the same look and had the sense to keep quiet. Hannah walked behind as if to the gallows. She was holding a brown envelope in her hand. She was crying, it was obvious. She sat down on the 3-seater sofa, looking at me sitting in the only armchair. John sat Stephanie down at the kitchen table and then put the coffee on. Hannah looked at me with her red eyes. "Is this your last word on this issue?" I answered briefly. "Yes," Hannah suggested. "Is there really no opportunity for negotiations?" And again I answered with one word. "No." "I talked to my sister and mom, but what about IVF?" Hannah asked. I was so disgusted by the way I was being treated that I even felt sickened by her question. So I wasn't going to feel much compassion for any of them. "Hannah, I already said that 3 weeks ago, but you just wanted to do it your way. I don't think I can trust you that you won't slip away and cheat on me behind my back. So it's too little and too late. You can donate eggs and hire a surrogate mother. I'll even pay for it. But you've treated me so disrespectfully that I won't agree to you carrying a child." I saw Stephanie start to boil again, but John put his hand on her shoulder. "Stephanie, you don't have to get involved in this. It's our own fault. Hannah and Mark have to figure it out for themselves." Hannah was crying quietly. I didn't want to be the bad guy in this situation, but it was clear that everyone was going to make me look like that. Hannah raised her head. "I don't want to get divorced. I need you. How do we fix this?" I took a deep breath. To be honest, so much water has already flowed under this bridge that I don't even know if we can. But let's try it. The first thing to do is to put an end to this whole sentence. Your decision to exclude me from the discussion and the subsequent proposal is unacceptable. If you want to continue acting as Susan's surrogate mother, I will continue the divorce. Next, we need to rebuild our marriage. I gave you the opportunity to be yourself, but you seem to take it as something that I would agree with whatever you did. A wife who respects her husband as an equal would never offer what you are offering. A wife who understands how much her husband puts into his marriage vows would never have even thought that this was acceptable. So we need to think about how to fix a broken mirror. Using the phrase broken mirror made her jump. You said that before. He said that a broken mirror can be repaired, but there will always be a crack in it. Is our marriage going to be like this? I looked into her eyes and said, I'm afraid so. By this point, Stephanie was beside herself with indignation. She stated, What about poor Susan? You're depriving her of her only hope for a child. Without taking my eyes off Hannah, I said, Hannah, you can collect your eggs. They have such a service. But Hannah, as soon as your eggs are taken, I expect you to have your tubes tied. A few years ago, we decided that we wouldn't have any more children. But Hannah said she didn't want to be sterilized. She said that her period made her feel special. She took pills to eliminate the possibility of accidents. When I mentioned the tubal ligation, she turned pale. Please don't make me do this. I just shook my head. You really don't understand what's going on. You were ready to play games with your body. The only way I can guarantee that you won't do it again is to take your body out of the equation. It means making sure that you can't get pregnant the good old-fashioned way. I'm sorry, Hannah, but when you play with fire, you can get burned. I don't know if Hannah was devastated or furious. She was crying when Stephanie spoke again. You're really heartless. I turned around and said, I studied with the best, Stephanie. Hannah agreed to be sterilized if I ended the divorce. We agreed that I would suspend the divorce and terminate it the day she went to the hospital for sterilization. A month later, we were in an IVF clinic. The clinic helped Sarah and Barclay find a surrogate mother, and John and I paid her $10,000 each. The egg collection procedure was simple, but left Hannah in slight pain. A week later, Hannah went to the hospital to be sterilized, and I went to the judge to withdraw the divorce application, which he granted without question. Life seemed to go on normally, but our once very active life came to naught, and we regularly sat in different chairs at the TV in the evenings, and we had nothing to say to each other. The surrogate mother was given 2 viable eggs about a month after the collection. Unfortunately, she suffered a miscarriage in the 3rd month. No other eggs were viable, and Hannah could no longer provide them. Hannah stopped hosting family events at our house, and I happily avoided events elsewhere. It doesn't take a genius to realize that we are actually 2 people raising children who have a piece of paper saying that we are married, but there is no real relationship. Everything I predicted has come true. Hannah proposed a hopeless situation, and such an outcome was inevitable. The loser, Hannah, could not tolerate the winner, me. This went on for 10 years. We did everything for the children's sports, events, the parent committee. Whatever you call it, I was there, and Hannah was always with me. All the parents were jealous of us, but at home we had a different life. Of course, we shared a bed, but there was no intimacy. Martin started his business at the age of 16, creating apps that he sold in various app stores. He was doing well when one day a large company from San Jose burst into town and offered him a 7-figure sum to buy his business, as well as work at his company with a 6-figure salary per year. He was 20 years old, and he clung to this offer. He and I went to San Jose to see the location, and he rented a house in a gated community located near the highway. James was 22 years old and had just married his college girlfriend. Both were accountants and worked for John. They rented a small apartment, but real estate prices in our city rose sharply, and so far they could not afford to buy. I set up a trust fund to buy them a house. Hannah and I became empty nests, and it was clear that neither of us wanted to say anything to each other. 2 weeks after James's wedding, Hannah asked me to come home early. I arrived and saw her sitting in the kitchen with a suitcase in her hands. She was crying, but then she started. "Mark, I think we both knew this was going to happen. Since that day in this room 10 years ago, we have ceased to be husband and wife. We were ships sailing through the night with some advantages. I think it's time to admit that our marriage is ruined, and like with a mirror, no matter how much we try to avoid it, the cracks are too big to ignore. I've filed for divorce and on exactly the same terms as you. I guess you don't need me to make sure everything is properly arranged. My lawyer's details are in the envelope. Maybe we can make everything as simple and friendly as possible?" I had to agree with her. When I applied 10 years ago, I divided everything up. She had her checking account, her investment account, her retirement account, and her credit cards. I had the same thing. This divorce has been in preparation for 10 years, but it is impossible to stop a car accident if it has already begun. And it really started in this room 10 years ago. I nodded. "I think it's for the best. I won't delay it. Let me know who to contact, and we can finish this as soon as possible." Hannah stood up and kissed me on the cheek. It was the first tenderness we had shown each other in a long time. She said, "I packed my things for the week. I'm going to rent one of the apartments on the same block as James's apartment. I'll let you know when I'm there and invite someone to take my things out. Do you mind if I take some of the furniture?" "Yes, just leave me a couple of chairs and a bed." She laughed at that. "I doubt that most of this will fit in my new apartment." Then she said, "See you later, Mark," and left the house for the last time. I was a little sad, but the main feeling was relief. We had not been a couple for a long time, and this led to the end of the relationship. I contacted Liam and he agreed to work for me again. The judge wanted us to go to a consultation, but we both said that the marriage was not worth keeping, so he granted the petition, and the divorce was finalized after 90 days, and on exactly the terms that Hannah offered. Shortly before the divorce, James announced that they were expecting a replenishment. The problem was that he hardly ever came to see me, so I made some important decisions. The first is to sell your business. I had barely put it up for sale when one of my biggest competitors came and offered $30 million to take it away. I gladly agreed. The business was not worth that amount to anyone but them. After that, I gave James the house and moved to a small town in Napa Valley. The town was so small that there was not a single car mechanic in it, so I opened my own business. This time it was small, only I worked in the workshop and at the hours I needed. Even better, Martin could now work most of his time remotely, so he moved to live with me in a new house, working in an office that we had set up in the basement. I went back and forth to our hometown. James was still a little upset about the divorce, but he wanted me to be involved in little Jane's life. I liked visiting her. About 2 years after she was born, I met Hannah at the house. She was seeing a doctor who was one of her clients. I was happy for her. Shortly after that, I found myself at a networking event in my new city, where my accountant invited me. At the event, I met Ruby, a 30-something-year-old dynamo engaged in web design. The next night, the network group had a drinks party, and as we were leaving, Ruby said, "I hope you'll be at the party." I looked at her and realized that she was grinning cheekily as she said this. I smiled and asked, "Okay, is it fun there?" Wasting no time, she replied, "This time it will be, I promise." Ruby was 20 years younger than me, but she swallowed me up that night. We never got married, but after that night I never lacked for company. After the miscarriage, Susan was devastated. She started going to counseling, then quit her job and returned to college to become a teacher for children with special needs. After graduating from college, she began working at a local school as a teacher in a classroom for children with special educational needs. In this class, she found the love she needed. Her depression passed, and she began to think that having no children was the best thing that had happened to her. Barclay turned into an old goat. Susan caught him trying to impregnate a surrogate mother the good old-fashioned way, and he succeeded. He married her, and eventually they had 3 children. Then he caught her cheating. During the divorce, it turned out that the first child was his, and the 2 younger children had different fathers. Since he was listed on the child's birth certificate, and it was not possible to find the biological fathers, alimony was withheld from him. Now he lives in a rather disadvantaged area of the city where most of his clients came from. His ex-wife, in fact, turned the children against him, and he does not see them. I have a feeling that he regrets that he ever had children,